Prigozhin, Prigozhin's potential death would be a result of his disloyalty to Putin and his marching on Moscow. And Putin doesn't like rivals. He doesn't like people to be disloyal. And people who emerge as rivals, people who emerge as disloyal, generally find themselves falling out of a top floor window or dying or drinking spiked tea or whatever. And yesterday, the passengers on board the flight that was downed apparently include not only Prigozhin, but the BBC describes as his right-hand man, Dmitry Utkin. But Dmitry Utkin is the person who founded Wagner. Dmitry Utkin is the person who molded Wagner and who gave Wagner its name. Dmitry Utkin is the person who had this obsession with Hitler and therefore named his group of mercenaries after Hitler's favorite musician. So once again, just to make it very clear, there were neo-Nazis in Ukraine, and they were the Wagner mercenaries. If there were other neo-Nazis involved in Ukraine fighting them, yes, but they were deeply inspired by the activities of the Wagner Brigade, and that element of evil comes from Russia and is specific. Now, the problem is that there's a lot of support for Prigozhin and for Wagner and for Utkin, not only in Russia itself, but also among the military. And Grey Zone, which is a Telegram channel linked to Wagner, it's the one that broke the news that the plane had been downed, that it had been shot down by Russian missiles. And it's the one that's claimed that Prigozhin is dead. Putin so far has kept very quiet about it. The Wagner channel, Grey Zone, has said that the boss died as a result of actions by traitors of Russia. And Saponkov has claimed that Prigozhin has been assassinated, and he's also a reporter with a Wagner bias. He thinks that Prigozhin's killing will have catastrophic consequences. People who gave the order completely failed to understand the mood and morale of the army. So there's plenty of speculation, and I imagine that speculation will continue. His body has not been found. Various other sort of news sites around the world have commented on the story. Biden says he's not surprised, and the US Security Council spokeswoman Adrienne Watson says, if confirmed, no one should be surprised. The disastrous war in Ukraine led to a private army marching on Moscow, and now it would seem to this. France has said there's reasonable doubts about the cause of the plane crash that presumably killed Prigozhin. We don't know the circumstance of this crash. We can have some reasonable doubts. Prigozhin was the man who did Putin's dirty work. What he has done is inseparable from the policies of Putin, who gave him responsibility to carry out abuses as head of Wagner. Prigozhin leaves behind mass graves. He leaves behind him messes across a large part of the globe, Africa, Ukraine, and Russia itself, but also Syria as well, and Libya. The presidential aide, Mikhailo Podolyak in Ukraine, said that we must be careful about the fog of war. It's worth waiting for the fog of war to disappear. Meanwhile, it is obvious that Putin does not forgive anyone for his own bestial terror, exactly the one that nullified him in June 2023, and he was waiting for the moment. And yeah, absolutely. Beware, disloyalty equals death. The demonstrative elimination of Prigozhin and the Wagner command 2 months after the coup is a signal from Putin to Russia's elites ahead of the 2024 elections. And this is a theory which is being put out quite earnestly across former Soviet states like Estonia. Prime Minister Kallas says Putin will eliminate opponents, and that scares anyone who is thinking of expressing opinion that is different from his. Poland says we would have great trouble naming anyone who would intuitively think that this was a coincidence. It so happens that political opponents whom Vladimir Putin considers a threat to his power do not die naturally. And there were rumors that Prigozhin was thinking of throwing his hat into the ring of presidential candidates for later on next year. So as for the UK, well, we've only got sort of silly people like Nick Gibb, the schools minister, saying, avoid jumping to conclusions. I mean, of course we're avoiding jumping to conclusions, but the reality is that conclusions are already there, and even if we shouldn't be jumping to quick conclusions, the information is already being discussed on the Telegram channels in Russian, and it would be stupid and silly to ignore that. I think for the moment we have to assume that Prigozhin is dead, but even if he's not, there's a manifestation of Putin's power, and I think we're not going to hear Putin claim responsibility for this unless Prigozhin is firmly confirmed as dead, because Prigozhin could have been on the other plane. This could have been a ruse by Prigozhin to draw out Putin and Putin's chief military strategists, Shoigu, Gerasimov, and so on, the people who were in the target of Prigozhin's guns. So what can we say? Very little, really. A lot of speculation, but the finger of blame points absolutely to Putin, whether he's got his man or not.